This week, we welcome Neil Clauson, Regional CISO at Mimecast, to discuss the board's evolving perceptions of cyber risk. In the Leadership and Communication section, why CISOs make great board members, unlock your leadership potential, 12 must-read books to take your skills to the next level, how to get people to listen to you, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly.
Mimecast has released its State of Ransomware Readiness Report for 2022, finding that most cybersecurity leaders experience the same or increasing numbers of ransomware attacks over last year. Together with Mimecast, organizations can stand strong in the face of cyber attacks, human error, technical failure, and work protected. Mimecast, work protected. Visit securityweekly.com/Mimecast to learn more. Managing and protecting the world's grueling number of endpoints, enabling Tanium's customers to see, control, and protect every endpoint everywhere. Tanium's mission is to provide certainty in uncertain times with the industry's only converged endpoint management, trusted by the U.S. military and the majority of the Fortune 100. Today, Tanium helps manage and protect nearly 30 million endpoints. Tanium, the power of certainty. Visit securityweekly.com/Tanium to learn more. The cybersecurity landscape is full of single solution providers, making it easy for unexpected cyber threats to sneak through the cracks. That's why Fortra is creating a stronger, simpler strategy for protection, one that increases your security maturity while decreasing the operational burden that comes with it. This is all possible thanks to Fortra's best-in-class portfolio and deep bench of expert problem solvers. Fortra's integrated, scalable solutions help customers face their toughest challenges with confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Fortra. Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 292, recorded January 30th, 2023. I am your host, Matt Alderman, back home in Dallas. Oh, sorry, Fort Worth, really. Joining remotely today, I only have one. Tyler, welcome today. At least you're not sick.
No problem. It's good to be here. Unfortunately, we were going to miss Jason. I mean,
yes,
he's not missing much.
Jason's under the weather, but after yesterday's games, there's probably a few people under the weather.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to or watching our podcast. We want to ensure that we are creating the most relevant and useful content for you. Please take our audience survey. It's crucial for us to make sure we're delivering more of what you want to hear and learn about. Please take a few minutes. Complete it by visiting securityweekly.com/survey. This segment is sponsored by Mimecast. To learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/Mimecast. Neil Clauson has 25 plus years of experience building and securing complex IT and security solutions. He's led security operations teams at Mimecast and other enterprises which face a variety of threats and challenges, and has built and enhanced cybersecurity programs to support and achieve business outcomes. Neil, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Thanks very much for having me.
So we want to talk about kind of the boards, the CISO, the board, the executive team, like everybody's evolving perceptions around cyber risk. And I guess I'll start this by, what do they care about? Like, what is the big, like, overarching theme around cyber risk right now? It was there for a while. Ransomware, is that still the main thread, or is it bigger than that?
I mean, I think it's bigger than that. I mean, as a CISO, we should all be asking ourselves, like, do I have unmitigated risk and risk which exceeds the risk appetite of my firm, right? And that, I think, is the key, is that second part, because there's always going to be unmitigated risk. And as a former network engineer, right, former data center person, like, you always want to turn those nerd knobs to 11 and to get everything locked down as much as possible. But in the end, cybersecurity is all about, cyber risk is about financial risk. And I think it's whatever risk is most applicable to that business is what's on their radar. Obviously, ransomware is huge now, but it could be whatever is going to prevent that business from delivering on the promises they've made to their customers, right?
Yeah. Does that budget fall into that category right now too, where we're kind of at that minimal viable security in order to maintain, because we're at pretty much a flat budget across the board. So are the CISOs able to kind of look at that risk in the same way that we have in the past?
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging, right? Because the goal is some people haven't even been past that level. They haven't exceeded that, cybersecurity poverty line, if you will, right? And what we're trying to do is, and a lot of the stuff that I try to do is, here's some people, some process, some technology, some ways to look at these which don't require budget. It just requires new ways of looking at it, ways to improve your decision-making process. So, right, and I think that's been the challenge with cybersecurity. It's always more, but if we're not being able to quantify how that more is adding value or quantify the reduction in risk, then we're only doing ourselves a disservice.
And it's the quantification term that I think is the most important term in this discussion, because a lot of times we look at risk qualitatively, right? We had Doug Hubbard on last week, who co-authored the book with Richard Seierson on how to measure anything in cybersecurity risk. And the challenge, I think, for cybersecurity is we've looked at things qualitatively: low, medium, high, impact, and likelihood. But it's how do I quantify risk? And then how do I understand, based on that quantification, where do I have risk appetite? Where don't I, right? And I think we're still pretty immature when it comes to risk management in the security space. And I think that's one of our big challenges, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, right. I mean, because again, we've been focused on that back of the house, technical controls, all the firewalls and those kind of moving parts, and not really having that eye towards this is all about the business. And that's, I think, for a while there was a strong push for CISOs to get MBAs just for that reason, so they could really kind of a better appreciation for that. So I think the teams that are being successful are the ones that are aligning their risk through things like business impact assessments, through risk quantification capabilities, to really say you are Y% likely to have Z dollars worth of loss in the next few years. That really tells a strong story, and really puts the onus back on you to be able to be that quantitative.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I wish we could all get there as an industry, because, I mean, look, insurance has been doing this for a long time with actuarial tables on how to price policies. We've always thought ourselves unique in this space, but we're not. And we had this part of this conversation last week was we're not that unique, and you don't need a ton of data to actually quantify some of this stuff. So we'll go out, talk bigger recommendations later, but like how would a CISO or an organization start thinking about risk quantification? Like, where would they start? Because I think that's the challenge for a lot of people, is like, I don't even know where to start.
I mean, I feel like this is all about improving the decision-making process, right? And people talk about you need metrics programs, and I would disagree with that and say you need a goals program. So the methodology is goal, question, metric. Start off with what are the goals that we're trying to achieve, and then what questions do I need to ask my team or be asked by leadership and the board on whether or not those goals are being met, and then and only then start producing the metrics that help answering it. But I think that when you start with that decision-making focus, start with a threat-informed defense, and really, I also like the good, better, best, or the crawl, walk, run analogy. Like there's a huge spectrum of listeners with different risk areas and different capabilities, different teams, staffing, budget, all that kind of stuff. So don't run before you're walking, and don't walk before you're crawling. So focus on that core stuff. How do you articulate the risk profile? Well, it could be something as simple as a CIS control self-assessment. There's the CIS ransomware business impact analysis tool. These are free tools, so you don't need a budget for it. And honestly, I like the idea of, we talked about not being qualitative, but going to your senior leaders and asking, the CFO, it's like on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the worst, like, is losing $1 million a 5, or is losing $10 million your 5, right? And if you do that proactively and ask your CMO, how many customers do we need to lose for it to be a 5? Or those different stakeholders, then when these risks occur, either in parts of your business or hopefully to your competitors, you're able to go, see, they just had a 5, and so therefore that might impact us. And how do I then framing? It's all about framing and helping those people make the decisions in a way that says, well, where do we stand versus ourselves and our competitors?
Yeah.
Do you think it's super important for the measurement process to happen early? That way you have some of those quantitative numbers to provide the different stakeholders and the documentation and recording of kind of that historical record, so you can see the progression of where you're coming from. Is that as important as actually the doing and setting the goals?
Absolutely. For me, I think it's because events are driven by behaviors, and behaviors are driven by systems, and the better we can measure and quantify those systems and really get a handle around it, then that's how you're going to drive change, right? And change management is all about getting that shared diagnosis, getting everybody on the same page, including the people who are most affected by those changes, to be able to again raise that. Do I have unmitigated risk? Yes. Is that within the risk appetite? Well, let's see. And then by being able to be either quantitative or semi-quantitative about what those impacts would be, and especially doing like business impact assessments, where you can start going, this is the number one way we make money, and the likelihood of something bad happening here is, we have 75% likelihood over the next year that we're going to lose X millions of dollars. And then I think that's helpful for security professionals to be able to raise that up to that. They're not the one making the decision, they're the ones helping that decision making process with that quantitative assessments, with again the control assessments, with the business impact analysis, that kind of thing. But there's a whole bunch of different ways to do that.
Yeah. Pick your approach, right?
Again, it's a crawl, walk, run. So I would say, there's a concept called the cyber defense matrix, which was an RSA talk a number of years ago, but it takes the NIST CSF, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, and then it spins that around to say, well, what tools do I have for users, for data, for networks, right? And I think that just having your team go through and flesh that out, be able to say, oh yeah, right, for example, DHCP gives me visibility into the devices on my network, right? So all these different ways and mapping that out, then you can see, well, where are their gaps? At one org I was at, they had nothing to do any of those 5 areas for databases, and that drove visibility, funding, ownership, and accountability, and it's that decision-making process.
It's funny you bring that up, because Sunil, you and Adrian Sanabria are the ones that did that presentation, and it is a really interesting matrix, right? To look at the capabilities across the different types of assets, because it gives you kind of a mapping exercise, right? And so it could help you then kind of prioritize, well, what types of security controls do I need to cover these areas? Mm-hmm. And that may be a really good way to think about, what are some of those minimum viable security solutions that I need in order to do that? Mm-hmm. Well, once I have those, then now it's, how do you report back, right? Because I think this is the other big challenge here is, I made this investment. How do I know that it's working? Is it moving the needle? Did it actually reduce my risk posture or not? Right? And so how do you start to measure the effectiveness of the investments you're making once you decide what those investments are?
I love it, right? And that's, to me, is as you start to get to that better best, it's breach attack simulation tools. To me, it's all about testing and measuring. So either continuous attack surface management firms, or just breach attack simulation tools. And there's enough vendors in this space now where I feel like you could, again, for free, just do a quote unquote POC. Just bring them in, run it, and basically be able to measure how effective is my specific stack, my network, my endpoint, my et cetera, against these different MITRE TTPs that are experiencing in the wild. So the good, better, best there is do it once a year as part of a pen test or just a POC. But if you bring those in and you're able to do it continuously, then you're able to reflect that back and help both back of the house decision making processes, like leaning on your IT folks to turn a policy that's currently in monitor mode to block mode, right? Which is, I think, one of the biggest problems. Sometimes it's not that we don't have the technology; it's we don't have the appetite to really push on our IT brethren to turn those nerd knobs to 11 like they need to be.
Right.
What are some of the ways that you're seeing good leaders now use some of the things that are really unquantitative? Something like security culture, or top-down or bottom-up buy-in for security process and the overall strategy there. Are there good ways that you've seen communication or reporting happen, and what does leadership really need to hear in order to continue some of these programs and continue that process and buy-in?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, because people are usually that weakest link. Another fan of methodologies is called the GROW methodology, right? And it's about what are your goals? What's the reality? What are the things that are going to either support or detract from getting those goals achieved? And then going through your different options. And I always say your first option should be do nothing. And people usually give you like, wait, what? And that's kind of getting their buy-in, right? It's gaming the system. You're right. Doing nothing against a really serious ransomware attack that's going to put us out of business isn't really an option. So therefore, now I've achieved your buy-in. I've achieved your, your part of being one of the stakeholders, and then kind of working through the other options. I'm also a huge fan of that psychological safety. So being able to do those pre-mortem analysis is in a way with some tools that people can share those ideas, especially the folks that know maybe where the bodies are buried or where the cracks are in the armor that could cause those failure scenarios to occur, and then flush those out. So there's a concept called red team thinking, which is basically devil's advocate. It's a way to stop that groupthink and to stop the everybody just agreeing with the person who spoke first or spoke the loudest. So I think it's about having that emotional intelligence as a leader and realizing that people in the end are people, and they're going to have competing priorities, and ultimately just want to be heard, and hopefully want the best, and being able to kind of get everybody on the same page. So it's about kind of building out those soft skills instead of just the technical ones.
Yeah, we have articles in the next segment that actually talk about some of those soft skills that they want to see out of the leader. So we cover a lot of that on the second segment.
Yeah.
But you brought up the human piece, right? As an industry, we spend a lot of money on system-based controls, implementing technology, even process. And we haven't seen much movement on the human side, right? We've been doing security awareness and training for a long time. We really haven't seen a substantial change in behaviors because it's still what is creating the breach, right? And
right.
Which is what kind of pulled me back into the product side here at Living Security to tackle parts of this. And we've talked about this in various ways, Neil. You've got events that you can or can't control. You have behaviors that you can control as an individual. Like, what are the inputs? What are the things we should be measuring that we're not measuring that would actually help us get a better handle on the human side of this?
Yeah, right. I always say the control should be commensurate with the risk. And I think you're right, that at the end of the day, the humans are the weakest link, and especially because when a ransomware attack is effective, we talk about insider threat, and that attack is just going to be taking over that user and acting as an insider. So, I think part of it is it's all the PAM tools and the multi-factor authentication, that kind of thing. But I think it's also investing in solutions that allow you to have both a carrot and a stick, right? So if a user is, and being able to pull the threat intelligence, this user is the most attacked user in my environment. This user is also the most clickiest user in my environment. They fail every single phishing simulation. I should have my controls working in a way that says, great, independent from which part of the org you're in, you now, if you're the most attacked and most clicky, then my policy is going to say that any unclassified URL is now segmented to remote browser isolation, right? So that to me is the way we need to move to, which is I'm not singling you out. It's a very if X then Y type of methodology, and again, supporting controls that do that.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because those for most people are two different systems, right? It's their email security side and their phishing side, and they're not connecting those data elements to the point where they could actually do that simple correlation to say, yeah, you're getting targeted a lot, and you're clicking on those either through simulations or real phish. Therefore, you should be changed into a different policy. And obviously, I mean, at Mimecast, you do both sides of that. But I'm just saying that, like, that's just a very simple example of where these investments not connected together aren't providing the visibility to do something simple like that.
Right. It's about improving the decision-making process, for myself as a leader, for the end users, right? Giving them contextual banners when they're web surfing or their emails, or is there risk involved? And I think we're evolving there as an industry, right? As a Gartner's mesh concept, right? And leveraging your ecosystem, especially like you mentioned, the budgets are getting reduced. So I need to have my smart people string together things with SOAR tools and APIs and that kind of thing, and having solutions that do that, and string my best of breed solutions together better for that decision making is just where we need to be.
Yeah.
Do you think we're going to get to that point as an industry where we actually begin to do some of the kind of the real-time heuristic behavior analysis like you're talking about, where we can identify and change policies on the flies for users that, we've seen an uptick in BEC email compromise, and now we've seen a string of emails into our financial. Now let's move them into a different policy set where we're a little bit more cautious based on the risk profile in real time, so that we kind of get this adaptive behavior and the computers are doing a lot of the hard work for us. Do you see that as like a potential in the future that we can actually obtain?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Mimecast just released a huge integration with Okta for that capability, right? And it's kind of I like the analogy of we're a bunch of chefs, right? We're our IT and security folks, and we're trying to create good recipes and quote put them on the menu. So I think the more companies that have that on the menu, that now they can cross-reference and publish it, that kind of stuff, it raises the appetite of the HR and legal and those other orgs that are typically resistant to maybe singling out a user to go, yeah, this is the right thing to do. So I think that, yeah, we're really starting to mature it's always about the technology first, because you could have all the policies in the world, but if you didn't have a way to enforce it, then it was worse than useless, because people realized you had no teeth. So I think as these solutions build the teeth, and our bite can be commensurate with our bark.
And Tyler, we're building pieces of it, and we've actually been having conversations with the Mimecast partner team and product team about how they come together. So Neil, you just mentioned Okta. Well, we integrate with Okta and SailPoint and Active Directory and all these other pieces, right? So we're modeling aspects of that. How can I then hand that back to a Mimecast in a more automated way for you guys to actually change policy on the fly, which is, Tyler, what you're talking about, right? I mean, we're so close to that now, by tying a few of these systems together, that we could get this more adaptive kind of risk model in place that would allow us to achieve some of this risk reduction and potentially even some of the behavior change that we really haven't made any dents on in the past 15 to 20 years.
Yeah, and there's a lot of solutions now that that came from the deception space that are moving to the identity space in terms of who's my most privileged user. And are they nested in an Active Directory group 6 levels down, right? And so kind of doing those kind of proactive remediations. Obviously, all the vaulting and the privileged access management tools, these are all the zero trust principles. So it's like, I feel like people feel like zero trust is a bit of a marketing term, and perhaps it is. And maybe if I can't do 100%, then I shouldn't do any of it. And I disagree. Like, you should, if you can get 80% there, do it, because that still closes your attack funnel. And the more you do that, and just keep lather, rinse, repeating on that, then you'll be in a better shape.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about kind of recommendations for organizations. And I'm going to split this in two. One, you've got a set of organizations that are still maturing through their security programs, right? They're still really early into the process. What recommendations do you have for those organizations on how to continue to build up maturity? Then I want to talk about more mature programs and look at how do you do tweaks there. But let's start with the immature. Like, what are the things they should really be thinking about to get their program to the next level?
Again, I'll boil it down to the 4 aspects of: have I fully articulated my risk profile? Have I maximized my controls? Have I minimized and reduced my attack surface? And am I telling a good story around that, right? I mean, that's the core of all that, wrapped with the decision-making process. And again, it's risk profile stuff could be as simple as just doing those maturity models or self-assessments, all the way up to, well, yeah, so I think that the more advanced stuff we'll leave for the more advanced firms, but that is a way. Or I feel like understanding what your threats are. So there's different MITRE attack coverage tools. There's a spreadsheet, and there's one that uses the JSON format, which can say, and there's also a MITRE attack top 20 controls, either in general or for me. And I like that, right? Because it can say, you can say, I don't have any of these tools, therefore these are the top 20 TTPs, and then being able to say, on a scale of 1 to 4, 4 being, with 1 being I've got no visibility to it at all, 4 being I have visibility, I have rules, I have detections in my SIEM, and I've tested those, right? So I think it's like, focus on the top of that pyramid. Don't try to boil the ocean, and focus on the risks most likely for you and where you have the most amount of gaps. Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a starting point, right? Like, based on your threat profile, what are the top 20 things you can do, even though you may only be able to do 5 of them? It's better than 0, especially these days, right? Yeah.
Right.
You think we
And
need
yeah,
to evolve the MITRE kind of the MITRE framework a little bit now and begin to mature that into a process that can talk to the business side of this and to the executives and the leadership, where we're getting very large levers that cover big swaths of those TTPs, the behaviors, and here's the technologies or the processes and procedures that we need to evaluate in order to cover this side of the MITRE, so that the language and the framework itself begin to tie both from the top all the way down to the technical people, and we can actually speak and start working on the same goals and processes.
yeah. I mean, it's a challenge because I feel like there's a point of diminishing returns the more technical you get talking to leaders. And again, I'll go back to, do I have the capabilities and the capacity? Capacity being the human side, but the capabilities. And so I would go back to the breach attack simulation capabilities, meaning saying like I'm 78% covered against the top 20 TTPs in my environment. Is that good enough? And bubbling that decision up. I think there's like, again, from a restaurant analogy perspective, there's back of the house and front of the house, and your board is on the front, and they just want to know what's the likelihood we're going to get attacked, what's the likelihood we're going to lose X dollars in the next year, or that kind of thing. So again, I'd probably say keep that back of the house, and leverage tools and solutions which produce those metrics and test that continuously.
Yeah, but that requires your security leadership to be able to bridge that gap, though, right?
Sure.
Because if we don't, to Tyler's point, if we don't expand the technical model to talk the business language, then the security leader has to be the bridge between that technical side and how to translate that to the business. And we talk a lot about that on the show, is the ability for the CISOs to understand the business risks and be able to translate the technical to the business side effectively. And that's pretty much what you're articulating, right? Is the CISOs have to be able to do that.
Yeah, as well as for your cyber insurance firms, right? Because that's where some of the real money comes in, where they're going to increase your premiums by 50%, and I'm happy to say we were actually able to reduce ours by 16% because of all the things we've been talking about in this podcast, which is being able to quantify and articulate that risk and how we've reduced that risk compared to our peers using some of those advanced tools. So that's where again, real money comes in, because cyber risk is financial risk, is business risk.
Right.
That's a great point that we don't often highlight from a cyber insurance standpoint. Everybody's getting up in arms about cyber insurance canceling policies, upping premiums, but if you're doing the right things and you're moving in that right direction, you can actually see the cyber insurance as a means to an end of financial gain and a savings, a cost center savings. So we really do need to shift kind of that dialogue and bring some of that positive light to the why in which this is a good thing for the industry, why we need to be moving this way, and why as a company that's a smart decision to actually get there.
Totally. Yeah.
So that's a perfect segue into my last piece, which is on the maturity side, right? What do I do, better? It probably some of the same things, you guys have done, right? By quantifying things and showing where you're reducing risk, that's actually going to put me in a better position for cyber insurance, for example. Are those some of the recommendations for the more mature programs? Like, just continue to refine, and where do you refine?
Exactly. So that's where, so there's firms out there, Cover, KOVRR, or Risk Lens, that have aggregated all of that breach data and all the controls that were behind those companies that were breached, and are able to start doing things like loss exceedance curves. There's a company called Scientia, Cyentia, that puts out an IRIS, it's the IRIS report, that really starts talking about risk quantification. And that's where I think as professionals, we're moving more and more towards, like where the insurance folks are, the actuarial quote unquote tables of being able to understand, how where we lay down our bets and where do we lay down our financial investments. And so doing that in a way that we can talk about loss exceedance curves and probabilities. And so the FAIR University's got some stuff around that, FAIR U. There's a couple open source models now. It's Excel modeling where you can start quantifying it. So that's where I feel like we're moving, and we should be as professionals, because we need to get out of the hand waving, chicken little sky is falling, and
Right.
things are good. So,
Exactly. If we can measure it, show where we still have risks, show where we don't have risk, we can adjust our programs accordingly based on those quantifications. And It's nirvana, but I don't know how many of us are actually there.
I mean, I think, and I think that it sounds scary, but it's not. It's just, again, crawl, walk, run, and start getting your hands around, I would say, fair analysis and being able to, because it's not about precision, it's about just narrowing the range, right? And leveraging your subject matter experts and even stuff from your tools, like how frequently are users failing phishing attacks? Okay, that's an input into your FAIR model, right? And so it doesn't have to be overly complex. It's just, am I improving my decision more than I was just throwing a dart on the wall? And I got a dartboard behind me now, so right. Right. So that's how can I improve that decision-making process of where do we have risk? Where do I have unmitigated risk? Where should I invest based on my risk appetite?
Right. Can't change what you can't measure.
Exactly. Yeah.
Neil, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Absolutely. Really enjoyed it. This is great.
If you want to learn how to transform cyber risk into business risk, please visit securityweekly.com/Mimecast to learn more. We're going to take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.